Assassin's Creed is a franchise I look back on fondly. Assassin's Creed 2 in particular was the first game I ever platinumed, and while that was partly due to it being one of the easiest platinums to obtain back then, I cannot deny the immense amount of joy it brought me at the time.
It would be my pleasure to welcome you.
Nice.
Following the closure of Altair and Ezio storylines, however, I parted ways with this series, and for over a decade I heard very little about Assassin's Creed. That was until recently. Yeah. Now I doubt I have to reiterate the general consensus regarding this game, but as someone who grew up loving Assassin's Creed, I just had to give the game a shot. And when I say give the game a shot, I committed to 100% completing Assassin's Creed Shadows in the hopes of finding out one thing. Just how hard is it? Before the game even starts though, we're slapped across the face with nostalgia as we see the fabled lineup of assassins completing the franchise's iconic leap of faith. I'd savour this moment, because it's the first and only time this game ever acknowledges their existence. Now just a few things to note, I played through the game on expert difficulty, which I believe is the highest one available. I also saved myself from the English dubbing and chose to play the game in Japanese, which was probably the best decision I have ever made, because the last thing you want to hear after 80 hours of playtime is this.
Resentment can grow quietly without much warning after a storm.
Alas, our journey begins in Kyoto, where we're introduced to one of the two main protagonists. The short walk to follow introduces a multitude of characters that all have a varying degree of impact on the game's story. For now though, there's only one person that matters, and let me tell you, his aura befits his status. After flexing the fact that we're bilingual, Oda takes Diogo under his wing, stating that he sees the potential in us, and it's up to us to prove him right. Fast forward 6 months and we find ourselves in our first combat encounter. As we slash our way through these absolute scrubs, the game teaches us about the numerous attacks we have in our arsenal. Now, I say numerous, but in reality, we've got a basic attack and a posture attack, which is essentially this game's heavy attack. It's not the most complex combat system, but compared to this, it's definitely a step up. This segment also introduces parrying, which if timed properly leaves the enemy in a vulnerable state, allowing us to follow up with some of our own hefty hits. Now, as spectacular as Diogo's finishes were, I quickly realised that there didn't seem to be a huge emphasis on assassinations, which was definitely a strange feeling, given that I was playing an Assassin's Creed game. But I guess there's a reason this game has two protagonists. And speaking of which, it's at this point where we're introduced to Naoe. Now, to put things bluntly, Naoe is extremely weak during direct combat, especially when compared to Diogo. But it's this dichotomy in playstyle between the two characters that Shadows handles quite well. The game also teaches us how to dodge in the following fights, which is the only way to avoid unstoppable attacks at this point in the game. I will say that the dodge button being on the Alt key was extremely strange, and often resulted in me taking a few more hits than I'd like, especially this early on. Regardless, after dealing with the onslaught of samurai, we're tasked by our father to find and protect a mysterious box, but more importantly, we're given one of the most iconic weapons in gaming history. And boy, does it look as sexy as ever. Luckily for me, it wouldn't be long before we got to use this bad boy as we jumped from bush to bush, assassinating anyone in sight. The added ability to crouch and prone in this game as a means of hiding in bushes and grass is an extremely strong ability that we'll be abusing throughout the whole playthrough. Naoe's tutorial segment is very reminiscent of the core Assassin's Creed gameplay I've come to love. We sneak our way across rooftops, stick to the shadows, and take out enemies one by one. At least, that's the intended way to play Naoe. If you wanted to, you could just charge in head first, but as I soon found out, this was a dogshit idea. Not only did these big guys essentially one-hit me, I didn't have the gear nor the levels to do any significant damage to their life bars. With a death to my name, I cautiously made my way through the castle while making use of our ranged kunais and eagle vision. Eventually though, we found our target, and after a quick acrobatics display, we dive into our best assassination yet. Now despite us reclaiming the box, as we're making our escape, we're shot in the leg before coming face to face with the Shinbafuku. And despite his cold deflection skills, our father is quickly dealt with, leaving us to crawl over to his limp body. Unfortunately, there's no happy ending here, and after expressing to Naoe to never forget a particular song, he passes away in front of us. Now, credit where credit is due. I thought this was an excellent start story-wise. It intertwines both perspectives of our protagonist well, and it solidifies our main motive to justify Naoe's vengeance, while also leaving plenty to be discovered regarding the song Nagato mentioned, as well as the 12 members who make up the Shinbafuku. From here, we're thrown into yet another tutorial disguised as a flashback. Either way, this gave me another opportunity to get used to the combat system in this game. After outclassing Nagato, we pet an adorable cat before decimating a group of poachers.
2 seconds later.
So that was a fucking lie.
Now, there are a few things I want to draw attention to here, as they'll become increasingly frustrating as we progress. Firstly, the lock-on system is essentially useless in this game. For whatever reason, the game will not automatically shift targets depending on who's attacking you, meaning if you're locked onto one enemy and another one winds up an attack behind you, there's a good chance your block won't counter it. Even worse, if they're completely off-screen, you won't even be able to see their attacks coming. This also leads me into the more important point. The enemies in this game attack at their own pace, meaning a lot of their attacks can overlap on top of each other, making it extremely difficult to get your own hits in when you're constantly parrying and dodging. It may not sound like a big deal this early on, but trust me when I say that some of the latter areas can feel like a complete clusterfuck due to the endless stream of attacks, many of which you can't capitalize on due to the sheer number of attacks coming your way. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Back in the present, we awake to find ourselves in the care of Soren and Junjiro. Unable to cope with the loss of her father, Naoe decides to waste away for a few centuries. As time passes, however, Naoe comes to terms with her situation, and with the help of Junjiro and Soren, makes a full recovery. Which means we finally get to play the game again. It's also at this point where we get our first look at the world of AC Shadows. Feudal Japan is split into 9 regions, and in the hopes of keeping things somewhat streamlined, I look to fully complete each region before moving on to the next. With our goals in mind and a whole world to explore, we bid farewell to Soren and Junjiro, only to level up immediately. Each level in this game awards a mastery point, which can be used to upgrade and learn new abilities for each weapon type. It's a rather rudimentary skill tree, all things considered, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. We also gain access to our inventory, where we can equip armor, weapons, and trinkets, and it's this system here that I have a major problem with, but we'll get into that later. For now, let's spend some time exploring Izumi Setsu, which acts as the first region of the game. Before we move on, however, I think it's best that we list what's actually required to 100% this game. See, despite Assassin's Creed Shadows being marketed as an action-adventure game, it could very well be considered a collectathon. Because, let's be real, this game has a fuck ton of collectibles and optional activities. Alongside the countless forts, castles, temples, shrines, kofuns, katas, targets, and horse archery activities, all of which have to be completed. We also have to interact with every Jiso statue, open every Kamon and legendary chest, collect every local dish and Kano painting, as well as draw all 5 legendary Sumai. We'll also have to assassinate every main target as well as complete all 230 quests. Izumi Setsu essentially introduces us to all of these activities, but before we do any of that, let's get that first hit of serotonin. I've certainly got my own personal gripes with this game, but I will never concede that this game looks absolutely breathtaking. Shortly after this, I came across my first Kuji Kiri. These have us completing a little minigame where we have to press certain keys in a specific order. These start off fairly simple, but by the end of the game they can get quite complex. This first 4 in particular, however, transport us back in time as they share Naoe's situation in the years leading up to the start of the game. What I've yet to mention is how level scaling works in this game. See, as you level up, so do the enemies you encounter, with each region having its own soft cap. When you pass these caps, however, each region continuously levels up with you, such that the enemies are never too weak. To some, the idea of level scaling like this might seem completely counterintuitive, as it somewhat kills the sense of progression. I personally don't mind the idea of level scaling, as it keeps the game somewhat challenging, and the addition of new better gear and additional mastery points were enough to trick my brain into thinking I was powering up my characters. That being said, the soft caps on each of these regions severely hurts player freedom, as it takes an open world by design and essentially forces you to tackle it in a certain order. The game even warns you when selecting a difficulty option, that should you try to take on higher leveled enemies, you're pretty much screwed. I found this out almost immediately during this first Kujikiri, where I was doing literally 0 damage. Realizing the mistake I had made, I was quickly humbled by a single slash before taking a sneakier approach where I stuck to the bushes and the grass. We eventually sneak our way into the game's first boss fight, which highlights an enemy's ability to use flurry attacks. As the name suggests, these are a flurry of relatively quick attacks that you either have to dodge or parry. They are by far the hardest attacks to deal with in this game, as they require precise timing each and every time. This becomes even harder when there are multiple enemies using them in conjunction with other basic and strong attacks all at the same time. That being said, I did manage to beat down this brute on my first attempt, although I definitely wouldn't call it a clean kill. With my first Kujikiri completed, I stepped back into Izumi Setsu with a newfound desire to explore this beautiful world. In the hours to follow, I did my first ink painting, as well as sneak my way into my first temple, where I was almost immediately spotted and then humbled by these monks. Fuck, everything does so much damage. After taking a long walk in nature to recollect myself, I once again attempted to sneak my way through Tennoji Temple, as I looked to collect the 3 lost pages scattered around it. Following this, I helped my first stranger, offered a prayer at the first Jizo statue, and clenched my arsehole as I awkwardly climbed my way into the first castle of the game. These castles are our first true test. Countless guards patrol the grounds, and should you get caught, you better prepare yourself for an onslaught of enemies. The main goal of each castle is to find and eliminate the samurai daishos. These guys are much tougher than your average guard, oftentimes having numerous health bars as well as armor that you have to whittle down. They're also able to string together numerous strong attacks, meaning you'll have to continuously dodge around them, waiting for your chance to strike. A single mistake oftentimes leads to an instant death, especially at this point in the game. Now, you could argue that playing Naoe like this is inherently wrong, and I'd actually agree with you. Naoe is extremely effective at assassinating her targets. The only problem though, is that for whatever reason, certain enemies can survive your assassination attempts. Why? I honestly have no idea why this mechanic even exists, as it completely defeats the point of assassinations. The chaos to follow further highlighted how difficult it was to find an opportunity to attack when each individual guard attacked at their own pace. And while I did manage to survive this scuffle, I wasn't exactly confident when proceeding forward. After another pathetic death, I finally tracked down the last daisho and proceeded to take him out with no worries. Bro, just piss off, honestly. With him defeated, I made my way up the tower where I was able to open the legendary chest, which as you can imagine, awarded me with my first piece of legendary gear. Now, as exciting as this moment was, you have to understand that by this point, I'd spent maybe 3 hours playing this game. In no world should I have a piece of legendary gear this early on. If it was a reward given to the player early on to further entice them to continue playing, maybe like a quest reward that every single player would get, then that would have made a lot more sense. But in Assassin's Creed Shadows, you're rewarded with a new piece of legendary gear every single time you conquer a castle or fort. This not only makes lower tier gear completely redundant pretty much instantly, but it also has a significant impact on the difficulty progression of the entire game. And it's a shame, because raiding the castles and forts are some of the most enjoyable segments the game has to offer. Yes, you can criticize their dodgy design concepts and relatively repetitive layouts, but the sheer number of possibilities available to the player when taking on a castle truly makes up for it. I mean, there's no better feeling than successfully luring a guard to its doom without a soul finding out. It's moments like these that made me fall in love with these games all those years ago. Unfortunately, with each and every castle I completed, the less enjoyment I got out of it. This could be due in part to the repetitive gameplay, but I'd wager it had more to do with the guaranteed legendary waiting for me at the end of it. Just to give you guys an idea of the problem I'm referring to, this is what my gear was looking like barely 10 hours into the game. Tell me, how is anyone supposed to get excited about looting gear when they've already unlocked a full set of legendary gear that you can constantly upgrade throughout the entire game? Not only does it make looting regular chests completely pointless, it also makes every single gear vendor completely useless past the 5-hour mark. Rambling aside, there are a few activities where your gear can't carry you. One such activity are the Kofuns, the first of which I stumbled across shortly after taking down my first castle. Now at first, I liken these Kofuns to the Assassin's Tombs in Assassin's Creed 2. While there are some very obvious similarities between the two, the Kofuns are a much more watered down variant. Whereas the tombs in AC2 often required some particularly precise platforming with a hint of puzzle solving slipped in. The Kofuns are all extremely linear in design, with arguably the easiest platforming known to man. They do pick up towards the latter half of the game with multiple branching pathways and puzzles that require you move around shells and throw bombs to blow up certain rock walls. But even taking these into account, I wouldn't call a single one of them challenging. Having completed our first Kofun and obtaining yet another piece of legendary gear, I made my way over to the nearest shrine where I came across an incredibly intimidating man. And while the skull next to his health bar wasn't enough to make me shit myself, the sheer fact that I wasn't even allowed to attempt an assassination on him had me running to the nearest toilet.
Fuck this shit, I'm out.
I may not have been dumb enough to take on that guy, but I was dumb enough to take on the next elite unit I saw. These elites are juiced up super units that not only have monstrous amounts of health, but also deal a concerning amount of damage. There's also the possibility that these elite units come equipped with elemental weapons that can cause certain status effects like poison and bleed. It was also around this point where I experienced my first season change. Now, originally I thought of this as a purely cosmetic mechanic, but to my surprise, these dynamic weather changes had a rather significant impact on the gameplay going forward. The heavy snowfall that accompanies winter slows my movements, while the relentless thunderstorms throughout summer made completing certain activities almost impossible. They also carry on over into cutscenes, which isn't relevant in terms of the gameplay at all. I just thought it was a neat feature. After taking in the beautiful sights of spring, I made my way on over to Tomiko's homestead. Here we meet with Tomiko, who unfortunately shares in our misery as she recounts how her friends and family were slaughtered without a care in the world. Empathizing with Naoe's loss, Tomiko agrees to let us use her homestead as our new base of operations. And this here is yet another standout feature in my opinion. The hideout somehow manages to blend the creative fun of base building with the intrinsic desire to become stronger. You could spend hours here customizing your hideout, but more importantly, gathering and smuggling resources back to our hideout will allow us to upgrade and build facilities with varying degrees of usefulness. Speaking of which, the very first side mission given to us by Tomiko sees us helping out Heiji. After saving him, he realizes that he has yet to pay off his debt to Tomiko, and agrees to set up a forge at the hideout which we can use to upgrade our weapons and armor. Alongside the forge, there are numerous buildings that can do things like increase our ration efficiency, the amount of experience we gain, the amount of resources our scouts are able to smuggle, as well as unlock multiple Kakegurui locations, which act as smaller hideouts that we can fast travel to, but also stock up on resources and accept contracts from. With so many resources to collect and so many buildings to manage, it can get quite overwhelming towards the latter half of the game. If only there were an all-in-one software that could help us manage our funds without any hassle. Oh wait, there is. I present to you Odoo Accounting, your legendary tier app when looking to manage everything from invoices to payments at the click of a button. Odoo's accounting dashboard helps visualize and keep track of payments, bills, and expenses while helping you automate the rest. This includes sending automatic follow-up reports, auto-completing every field for your bills, as well as syncing bank statements with over 28,000 banks, meaning you'll never have to manually import bank statements ever again. Because of Odoo Accounting's worldwide compatibility, your charts, taxes, and electronic invoices will be automatically integrated into the respective tax rates depending on your country. And with over 70 localizations, it doesn't matter where you're accounting from, because Odoo will always account for you. Now if that wasn't mind-blowing enough, all of these features could be yours to use for absolutely nothing, as your first app with Odoo is completely free for life. Just look at how Naoe reacted when I told her this. Well, what are you waiting for? Start your stress-free accounting days now with Odoo. Thanks again to Odoo for sponsoring this video. After upgrading my current gear to match Naoe's level, I set my sights on my first Shinbakufu member, the Wounded. Before we can deal with this guy though, we've got to collect information surrounding his whereabouts from Kyonyo, who's holding off some forces at Gensenji Temple. Each Shinbakufu member comes with numerous objectives that we must complete, as they often lead to instance missions that are separate from the open world. In this case, we have to first talk to Mitsumune, who tells us to retrieve the statue of Shinran, which he had personally lost. After doing so, we meet back up with Kyonyu before starting our raid on Amagasaki Castle. This particular raid, as well as the assassination of Wada Koretake, are exclusive objectives that can only be attempted after completing the rest of the objectives. These instances are entirely discordant to the vast majority of other assassination targets, as you'll most likely stumble across them while exploring the vast landscapes of Japan. You'd be surprised how often I came across some random target that I wasn't even aware of, only to assassinate him and unlock an entirely new wheel of targets from an unknown organization. Better yet, you could very well sneak up on a random target just to assassinate him while he's trying to assassinate someone else. Comical timing aside, you'd expect these instance missions to be more complex in design, and while some of the latter targets certainly put up a good challenge, in the case of Wada Koretake, it's as simple as luring him towards a bush and finishing him off. The large majority of guards leading up to his encampment are preoccupied with our allied forces, meaning there's almost no challenge in reaching our target. But if you thought he was an easy target, imagine taking out another member of the Shinbakufu through a string of predetermined dialogue options. While I can appreciate the game's approach to diversifying the gameplay elements surrounding each target, I must say, I never expected to terminate one through a cutscene. With 2 of our targets eliminated, I once again got distracted while exploring the vast lands of feudal Japan. Yet ironically enough, it was during these travels where I discovered the hardest part of this entire game, climbing mountains. The only thing more common than assassination targets in this game are trees and bushes, and as dumb as it sounds, this foliage was far more annoying than any enemy we'd encountered so far. See, to 100% this game means to find every hidden secret or undiscovered location. As a result, I spent literal hours exploring every corner of the map, which oftentimes involved hiking up the side of countless mountains. The only problem is that most of them can't be scaled by Naoe, as for whatever reason, Ubisoft decided it best that she slide down even the most gradual of slopes. Pair this with bushes and trees that you can't see through and you've got a rather frustrating experience. Just piss off, man! Luckily for us though, there was a solution to this. Yeah. So for whatever reason, Naoe's horse companion can literally defy gravity and jump up 90-degree walls essentially. Don't ask me how it works, I'm just glad it does. As you can imagine though, being able to scale literal walls does come with its fair share of drawbacks, at least in terms of the supposed difficulty surrounding certain activities. One such activity that I've yet to discuss, mainly due to the fact that it had taken me this long to come across it, are the hidden trails. Now, as their name would have you think, these are platforming puzzles that are hidden out in obscure parts of the world. It's because of this very fact, however, that they are remarkably easy to complete. On one hand, you have the Kofuns, which are restricted to a confined space, meaning you have to solve the puzzles as the developers had intended. The trails being part of the overworld, however, means you could very well stumble across the reward chest by accident without having done any of the platforming to get there. Well, that was fucking easy. Even if you were to complete them as intended, they're also extremely simple and easy to complete. The difficulty is reflected in the reward, as you're only ever given epic gear for completing these paths. God, incoming rant, honestly I just wish they included like a mythic tier above legendary that could only be dropped through like random chance, you know what I mean? At least that way, I'd be more excited when looting chests past the 20-hour mark, instead of, ooh, here's a common one, here's an uncommon, oh, what's that, an epic? Oh, it's dog shit. Whatever. Having wasted another few hours, I came to realize that the decisions I had made following the death of Wada Koretake resulted in one of our potential allies distancing herself from the rest of us. In the hopes of recruiting her to our newly formed brotherhood, otherwise known as the Kakushiba Iki, I set out to make things right. This mission sees us meeting with Yaya's adoptive sibling as we chasten towards an awkward but much needed reunion. We preach the notion of forgiveness to her, which thankfully works out as she agrees to join us on our quest for revenge. With this, we've recruited our first ally, who we're able to call on during combat to help us out. Unfortunately for us, these allies aren't nearly as effective as the assassins were in Brotherhood, but they definitely take some of the aggro off you, which helps in situations where you're surrounded. With 2 Shinbakufu dealt with, I snuck my way into meeting with Mitsuhide, who was said to have been a friend of Oda Nobunaga. Despite his title, he essentially throws Nobunaga under the bus, alluding to the fact that he was the masked horseman all along. Now, to be honest, this was all sounding a bit too sus, yet despite not believing it, I found myself atop the rooftops with one goal in mind: assassinate Oda Nobunaga. As you can imagine, a person of his stature has a few billion guards patrolling the grounds. Surprisingly though, most of them are just basic enemies without extra health bars, meaning it was relatively easy to take them out one by one. And if that wasn't surprising enough, our fight with Nobunaga was even easier. With Nobunaga defeated, our chance at revenge is swiftly ruined by Yasuke at the last minute. The short fight to follow ends with Yasuke sparing Naoe as Nobunaga clears up the fact that he wasn't the masked horseman that night. Knowing he's without hope, Nobunaga instructs Yasuke to finish him off. Back at the hideout, Naoe struggles to come to terms with the fact that she's been gaslit and betrayed by Mitsuhide. Unfortunately, we don't have time to mope as we make our way over to Kitano Castle in the hopes of finding Jinjuro, who has yet to return. Surprisingly, Jinjuro isn't the only one who shows up at the castle though, as we see a determined Yasuke walk towards the approaching guards. It's at this point where we finally get to play as Yasuke once again, and just like in the beginning, this guy feels extremely overpowered. Not only does he come equipped with more defensive capabilities and ration packs than Naoe, his attacks are extremely strong, being able to slice through most health bars with a single swing of his katana. With that being said, he's absolutely awful at sneaking around and he can't climb a wall to save his life. None of that really matters at the moment though, and after the world's shortest fight, we meet up with Naoe and Jinjuro. Yasuke starts by asking Naoe for forgiveness, and despite her resistance, Jinjuro manages to convince her to give Yasuke a chance, thus forming the core group of the Kakushiba Iki. Now, as heartwarming and wholesome as this moment is, all I really cared about was finally getting to play as Yasuke again. I will admit that I much prefer the playstyle of Naoe, but because we're going for 100%, there are numerous activities and quests that are exclusive to Yasuke. He also comes equipped with gear that wasn't legendary tier, meaning I was once again excited when raiding and looting castles. Before I got into any of that though, I made a quick stop at a Kofun that I had stumbled across earlier as Naoe. At the time, I was unable to enter it because this opening was covered in rocks. Thankfully, Yasuke has the ability to carry and throw bombs, which we can use to destroy these rock walls. Please don't ask me how long it took me to figure that out. The other activities that are unique to Yasuke are horse archery and kata. Katas are a relatively simple minigame that require us to press each key as they appear on screen. These do get progressively harder as we continue through each region, but they aren't too tough for the most part. Just a piece of advice for those of you on PC, I'd recommend not rebinding the dodge key to your mouse, as it can get pretty damn confusing during this particular minigame. Wait, what? Wasn't that just mouse click? What's going on? Horse archery on the other hand can range from mind-numbingly easy to surprisingly hard. As I stated before, the weather conditions play a large part in our ability to see the goddamn targets. There are other courses that just have tiny ass targets that are extremely well hidden. Despite all that though, none of them took me more than a few attempts to complete. After mucking around a bit in the overworld, I once again locked in and spent some time hunting members of the Twisted Tree. Due to this being a side objective, I had already dealt with the vast majority of them while exploring as Naoe. As I stated before, because the majority of these targets are situated in the open world and not in instance spaces, they're oftentimes extremely easy to take out. This holds true for almost every target. It didn't matter if they were part of the Yamabushi or the Godai. The large majority of them can be found alone, with very obvious hiding spots to assassinate them from. You have to question the AI on some of these targets, as you can literally walk up right next to them without them reacting at all. Either way, after dealing with a few targets, I spent a little longer exploring Yamashiro, which involved collecting a few more legendary pieces for Yasuke. Realizing I wasn't struggling at all at this point in the game, I figured it was once again time to push the story forward. I trained Yaya up to a max rank in the dojo before setting my sights on the Fool. This mission is interesting as it was the first instance in which we get to play as both protagonists. We start off as Yasuke as we storm through the front door, killing everyone in sight. Because I tended to explore the region before completing story-based missions, I never really struggled when playing through as Yasuke. Having annihilated the front guard, we shift over to Naoe, who's tasked with opening the inner gate from the inside. It's missions like these that really highlight how different the playstyles are between Naoe and Yasuke. I may prefer the playstyle of Naoe, but I think both feel incredibly strong in their own ways. Now, getting to Issei Sadaoki was easy enough, but surprisingly, he was actually much harder than I first thought. The main problem with this guy is just the number of guards he has situated around him. He's also not in the best position to get a free assassination off, and he doesn't actually move at all, I believe. This made getting into a position while remaining undetected extremely awkward, and more often than not, I ended up alerting every guard in the universe, which just ended in a clusterfuck where I'd get my ass handed to me. I essentially had to abuse my abilities to finally beat this guy, which honestly felt pretty bad. My struggles continued as I made my way into the region of Harima. What I had failed to realize at the time though was that Harima as a region out-leveled me, which is something I realized almost immediately, as whole ass abilities did little but tickle my enemies. Miki Castle was also the first area in which I became a wanted fugitive. Not only does this make every enemy highly aware of your presence, but it also calls upon the Guardians, some of the toughest enemies in the entire game. Their massive frames and imposing aura are one thing, but their ability to track you to the ends of the earth are what make them truly terrifying. As long as you're wanted, these guys will hunt you down no matter where you are, essentially guaranteeing that you'll never feel safe as long as you stay in that region. Now you could just kill these guys like any other, but at this point in the game, and considering my level, it was taking me far too long to deal with even one of them. This sense of powerlessness extended well beyond these guardians as I was brought to the brink of death by even the simplest of enemies. Even after switching to Yasuke to erase my wanted status, I was still struggling to complete basic areas like temples. Honestly, it got to the point where I just had to put the fries in a bag and hop off onto another region with my tail between my legs. And that region was none other than Omi. As I did with every other region, I spent the first hour or so exploring the region. I prayed at some shrines, took in some magnificent views, and of course, conquered some castles. From the few combat encounters I experienced here, I could immediately tell that this was one of the 2 intended regions after Yamashiro. As I stated earlier, the game might be open-ended in design, meaning you could theoretically go to any region in any order, but the fact that each one has a soft level cap makes exploring that region near impossible unless you've reached that level at a minimum. While it may have been an unintended misstep, this does unfortunately make the game feel much more linear than it actually is. The other drawback is that if you're completing all the optional content like I am, it's almost guaranteed that you'll end up out-leveling the region you're exploring well before you're done with this content. In a sense, this is why I kind of prefer that this game has some kind of level scaling, otherwise I think it would be far too easy. Either way, Omi felt like a complete cakewalk when compared to Harima. The castles were almost too easy to conquer, enemy encampments were a breeze, and most of the assassination targets died to a simple kunai. The 2 Shinbakufu members may as well have been regular enemies with how fast they crumbled under us. And then we get to the fight against Gamo Yoshimitsu. This guy is said to be a champion swordsman, and upon meeting him, he drops this like badass monologue. Just to end up like this 30 seconds later. This fight pretty much sums up my adventures through Omi. The only time I truly died was during my fight against Marumune Nagayoshi in Yasuke's personal mission. I was kind of on the fence of whether I would count this one, but I think I will count it as a death, although you don't technically need to win this fight to proceed. This whole mission here is a retelling of the hard work Yasuke put into training to become a samurai, and his questline ultimately ends with us facing off against the students of Nobutsuna, who, as we'll come to see, make for some of the hardest and most unique fights in the entire game. For now though, it was time to head back to the very first Kofun we came across. This time however, there was something very important waiting for us. It's beautiful. After nearly 40 hours of playtime, we finally get some kind of callback to the fact that we're playing an Assassin's Creed game. And boy, what a callback it is. These robes are always a joy to wear. With our new robes equipped, it was only right that I dealt with a target in stylish fashion. Okay, make that 2. Alright, maybe 3. Can you tell I was having fun? Now, as exciting as it was to finally be sneaking around in Assassin's robes after all these years, that didn't exactly help in instances where I was completely surrounded. That being said, during my investigative work on the Ox, I came across a mysterious Ronin who was getting his ass absolutely whooped by a group of samurai. After an impressive showing from yours truly, I turned to see that exact same Ronin sitting by the campfire as if nothing had happened. Like, no buddy, you got your fucking ass kicked. Don't sit there all nonchalant like that. I'm not having it. Either way, we end up helping him find his endangered friend Seiji. Unfortunately, we don't have time to play nice, and after annihilating him in front of his old mate, we plan our assassination of the Ox, and boy, did this plan take a while to execute. The Ox walks around in an open area that is guarded securely by countless enemies. Each of these guards have multiple health bars, meaning our best bet was to lure them to the outskirts before taking them out one after another. Having decimated his entire unit, all I had to do was wait around in this inconspicuous haystack before dealing the final blow. Almost immediately following this, I found myself in a snowstorm. In an attempt to shield myself from the blistering harsh winds, I quickly snuck into the storage area of the Himeji Guild, where I confronted the husband of Suzu. Fearful for his life, this guy starts legging it out of town, which I've got to say is extremely impressive given the fact that it's winter and he's essentially butt naked. He eventually gasses out, allowing us to catch up to him and gain some intel on the situation at Himeji Castle. This info leads us to the shrine nearby where we make quick work of this shinobi here. The questline culminates in us rescuing the young Lord Hidei, before finding out that the noble member of the Shinbakufu was his father all along. Unfortunately, we're not able to take him out here, and are instead bum rushed by a group of shinobi. Thankfully none of them are armoured, and after a short scuffle we walk out almost entirely unharmed. The same can't be said for old mate Yukita here, who foolishly locked himself away at the top of the Tenshi, essentially guaranteeing that he'd have no way to escape his eventual death at my hands. Now despite me saying that, this fight wasn't as easy as I expected. It probably would have been smarter to play as Yasuke here, as Naoe didn't seem to be doing a lot of damage with her attacks.
Holy look at all this damage!
Yukita also has this annoying habit of calling in reinforcements, which only adds to the chaos that comes from fighting multiple enemies in such a small space. With the blood of yet another Shinbakufu on our hands, I thought it was about time we cleared up a few more objective boards. The first set of targets I went after were the Godeyes, and despite some of them having some incredibly cinematic backgrounds, almost all of them went down without putting up much of a fight. The same could be said about the Yokai, who were not at all supernatural. The yokai are fairly unique in the fact that most of them only show up during certain seasons or at a specific time of day. The only problem is that there's no way to fast track this process. You can kind of do it with seasons, but even then you sometimes have to wait around. What I didn't realize at the time though was that each hour in Assassin's Creed Shadows equates to 2 full minutes in real time, meaning I spent close to 20 minutes sitting in a bush waiting for the Kappa to appear. Out of all the objective boards so far, the corrupt icons were by far the easiest to deal with. Every single one of them can be killed from a distance with a single kunai to their heads.
What are you aiming at?
Or I guess 2 kunai. My ruthless killing spree wasn't just contained to organizations that I knew of either, as there were multiple instances where I stumbled across a mysterious target who for whatever reason always had their backs turned to the door. Considering I had maxed out legendary gear, which to be fair I've had for over 30 hours by this point, none of these targets were putting up much of a fight. In fact, the only instances where I struggled even a little bit were when I became a wanted fugitive and had to fight off multiple guardians at once. Even then though, if I was playing as Yasuke, I'd be able to defeat even them. As Naoe, well, let's be real, we shouldn't be getting caught as Naoe in the first place. This isn't to say the game doesn't attempt to get progressively harder. For one, the piss-weak unarmored guards in Izumi Setsu and Yamashiro have been thoroughly replaced in regions like Yamato, whose castles feature predominantly armored enemies with multiple health bars. They also seem to be much more responsive to the sounds you make and won't waste any time running up to that fucking bell in order to get you on that wanted list. The region of Yamato also featured one of the hardest quests in the entire game. See, during my travels in Yamato, I eventually came across Omin Sanji Temple. Yet despite its name, this place looked more like the Octagon than any temple I'd seen. And honestly, there's a good reason for that. See, this temple houses the Tournament, a particular side quest in which we have to defeat 5 opponents of increasing difficulty. Now I say increasing difficulty, but if this first opponent's damage was anything to go off, this was going to be tough from the get-go. Every single one of these opponents hits like an absolute truck, meaning the margin of error was extremely low. Now despite me saying that, I did manage to defeat the first 3 opponents on my first attempt, and with the momentum in my favour, there was no way I would lose now. I literally died within a second. This 4th girl was probably the hardest of the whole bunch, as her quick combo attack would almost always result in a one-hit kill. Even the so-called champion couldn't hold a candle to her, and like the rest, he crumbled underneath our god-given skills. Having become the undisputed champion in every weight class to ever exist, it was time to move on to Wakasa, and it's in this very region where we begin hunting the fox. Before any of that though, we stop by to talk with Nagahide. He tells us to meet with Hong to get a clearer picture of the troubles happening in Wakasa. This results in 2 branching paths. First we need to check up on Nagahide's cousin, who is being targeted. As predicted, we're attacked shortly after meeting them and have to defend them from a group of enemies. Having brushed these guys aside with ease, we look to find some leads on a man named Samemaru, who has supposedly been massacring the Niwa clan. Reaching this guy was certainly a bit tougher than usual due to the fact that his base of operations was situated in the middle of a bandit den. Even so, we're so overpowered at this point that we might as well have entered this den with a blindfold on, as we completely shat on everyone here. Our final task has us tap into our sense of hearing as we follow the faint sound of a hum. Somehow, this leads us to facing off against Samemaru, who is by far the easiest boss we've come across. The most concerning aspect of this entire fight was the panic attack I had as I almost killed the civilian who just ended up in the arena somehow. Okay, I may have spoke too soon, because the fight against the fox himself was just as easy. What I've failed to mention so far is that one of the engravings on all my weapons allows me to deal up to 35% more damage during single target encounters, meaning the large majority of these boss fights are pretty much a cakewalk. Now, as disappointing as it is to say, our next Shinbakufu target didn't fare much better than the fox. I'll never understand why these high profile figures always leave themselves completely vulnerable to attacks from behind. Either way, with another 2 members taken care of, it was finally time to get our revenge on that conniving bastard Mitsuhide. But if we're to have any hope in taking this guy down, we'll first need the help of Hideyoshi and his army. While an absolute bloodbath takes hold of the battlefield, it's up to us to deal the killing blow. Now, as you'd expect, Mitsuhide has a ton of guards patrolling the area. Thankfully, with all the skills we've picked up, we're able to dispatch them one by one until we come face to face with the man himself. Realizing he stands no chance in an actual fight, Mitsuhide starts booking it towards the harbour on horseback in the hopes of escaping across the sea. Unfortunately for him, Ubisoft thought better than to drag this game out even further, and thus our final showdown against him begins. Now, to give this guy some credit, he is remarkably tanky. Even as Yasuke, it felt like I was doing chip damage with some of my biggest hits. That being said, while his defensive capabilities were impressive, his offensive ones were complete garbage. I even opted to switch to Naoe mid-fight, just to see if it would make the fight any harder, and it didn't. In his defeat, he asks us to let him die as a samurai, but honestly, I just wanted to see another hidden blade kill. All that remained now was that masked horseman, who surprisingly turned out to be the Shogun all along. Because of the wise words he shared with me back at the start of the game, I chose to spare him, which ended the game, right? Oh, of course it didn't. Who am I kidding? I've only sunk 60 hours or so into this game, and anyone who's played a recent Assassin's Creed game knows that's fuck all. The next 5 hours or so were spent killing target after target after target. I must have killed over 30 targets during this period, none of which were challenging in the slightest. In the hopes of breaking up some of the monotony that came with this killing spree, I decided to finish up both Naoe and Yasuke's personal quest lines. Naoe's was as simple as discovering a hidden vault in which she could finally keep her promise to her father as she returned the jewel. Hanzo also makes a reappearance and drops a bomb regarding Naoe's mother's whereabouts, but this storyline is never truly resolved, which was a bit strange. Yasuke's final missions require a bit more from us as we fight our way through countless enemies while hunting down Nuno Karo. After some admittedly awkward platforming, we come face to face with Nuno Karo. Now, if you thought this guy was going to be the ultimate challenge, then you mustn't have been paying attention to what's been happening in the last 10 minutes or so. Because just like everyone else, we absolutely manhandled this guy, and quite literally at that. Not missing another chance to pull out one of those cinematic shots, we end Nuno's life with one of the cleanest slashes in the entire game. And just like that, we've 100%ed the game. Nope, once again we have not. Anyway, after what felt like 10 years worth of credits, I realized that I needed to complete a few more tasks before taking on the epilogue act. These tasks included a handful of katas, which by this point had me pressing multiple keys at once. One final horse archery course, which was arguably the most annoying of them all as I attempted it during a thunderstorm, as well as a few kofuns that I had missed while playing as Naoe. Now, as I stated earlier, none of these knowledge point activities gave me too much trouble. At most, I had to attempt them 2 or 3 times before completing each one, which honestly I was thankful for after 80 hours of playtime. What I wasn't thankful for, however, was having to go back into castles that I had already conquered, just to move cabinets which held a Keimon chest behind them. Each of these Keimon chests held a particular clan crest, all of which needed to be collected to complete a quest given to us by Ota Gyuchi. The annoying part lied more so with the amount of time it took to locate and find each of these chests, as by this point, no combat encounter could threaten us whatsoever. With the clan crests collected, I finally found the time to talk to Junjiro. His questline, as you can imagine, was incredibly simple. All it had us doing was buying some cooking ingredients, chefing up the worst soup to ever exist,
この汁は実にひどい。
and finding Junjiro's banner. Having done that, we share our moment with all our friends at the hideout before making our way to the best viewpoint in all of Japan. Naoe and Yasuke talk about the future to come and their shared desire to protect Junjiro, only for him to show up at the last minute. The scene ends with all three of them staring out as the sun sets over them. Following the completion of this epilogue, we're rewarded with the coldest set of armor to ever exist, the Master Assassin robes. And thankfully I had left myself one last task so I could savor my time in these fresh robes. This excitement soon turned to disdain though, as I spent literal hours trying to find the last few Jiso statues. I swear the developers should have added a feature that once you ascend every viewpoint or something, it should just clear up all the fog covering the map. I understand wanting to incentivize exploration in your open world, but when the world's this empty, and I'm forced to find these tiny ass little statues along the roads, it can get pretty tedious. And as boring as this part was, I persisted until I came across the final statue I needed. After a draining 81.5 hours, I had 100%ed Assassin's Creed Shadows. Along the way, I had desynchronized a total of 31 times, which was honestly a lot less than I was expecting considering I was playing on expert difficulty. The game starts off hard, but like most games with RPG elements, the further you progress, the stronger you become, and unfortunately the enemies in Assassin's Creed Shadows just can't keep up. Another question I'm sure to get is, do I think the game is worth it? Now if you're looking to 100% this game, I'd advise not wasting your time on it. Go back and play like Brotherhood, Black Flag, or Assassin's Creed 2. But if you just wanted to play through the story, then I'd recommend subscribing to Ubisoft Plus, as it's far cheaper than buying the game outright. I think for a single playthrough, it's well worth it if you have enjoyed the Assassin's Creed franchise in the past. If you haven't, don't waste your time playing this game. With that being said, it's not a particularly hard game to 100%. And with that, I wish you all the best. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, feel free to drop a like on it. If you hated the video, then by all means, feel free to drop a fat dislike as well. If you're mentally insane, do consider subscribing, and I'll see you all in the next one.